us and we will do Q&A live with all of you. And as Polly is doing a wonderful job bringing you in, gentlemen, we've talked about the metrics that actually matter, but I want to hear from each of you about the ones that just drive you crazy. Everybody uses them and they add absolutely no value. Jim, do you want to start? We haven't heard from you in a few minutes.
No, let Mark start.
There are so many that in the sales world, number of calls, number of dials drives me nuts. Just about every vice president of sales or sales leader or even CEOs who understand sales says, man, I want to stop measuring quantity. I want to start measuring quality. And then they rate people by how many times they dialed the phone or how many lunches they've done or how many proposals or how many demos. They hate what they're doing, but they do it. And that's because they don't know any better, perhaps. Or it could be, you know, the old story, I learned how to do this from an old guy who learned it from a dead guy, and that's good enough for me. That drives me nuts.
Lisa, I'll jump in. I had a customer, and I was working for a company in Ireland, and I was in charge of the US, but the European folks, their salespeople, they paid them a bonus on activity. What? You know, you need activity to drive revenue, but you don't pay on activity because activity doesn't, it will ultimately bring the revenue once you close the sale, but you don't get paid bonus because you can have a ton of activity. They could get their bonus and never close a sale. And so paying on activity, just similar to what Mark said, just is so wrong.
You know, on the people side, Lisa, turnover, right? That's been a stat for a long time. And the problem with it, it tells you nothing other than a trend, right? It doesn't tell you why. So any metric that doesn't give you insight into why, to me, has really limited value. Give me a metric that's a leading indicator. Why are people upset? Why don't people like their boss? Why are people not engaged? You know, give me those kind of metrics that can give me insight into maybe why we're having some churn.
Lisa, real quick, George Crichton put here in the chat, and he's been a sales leader for years. No value, number of sales calls, quantity over quality. He says, drives me crazy. I agree. Somebody can make 100 sales calls and never close anything. They make three sales calls, close all three, and they got 100% hit rate. Wow.
You know, Jim, I still tell this story all the time. I was, back in the days, I was a sales individual contributor. I had access to 2 appointment setters, one of whom was always getting bonus because he dialed like a madman, and one who always seemed to be getting me the good appointments. And it turns out that the compensation system in that little dialing call center that those 2 of them were in was based on how many calls you got. And the dialing machine guy had figured out that the call counter tripped at 1.5 seconds into the call. So somewhere between the first and second ring, but way before anybody could actually reach out to the phone and pick it up. So he would dial somewhere between a first ring and hit the first, you know, like syllable of hello. And he was getting bonused out the yin yang for all the dials that he was making.
That's awesome. We have Pete Winters who'd like to ask a question.
Thanks, Lisa. Given the varied expertise that each of you possess, I wonder what's different in your coaching, your consulting, your practices with your clientele as relates to a hybrid work environment. So many people are returning to work, but working from home and or the office. What's changing in what it is you're delivering, what you're measuring? There's got to be some changes in each of your practices, I would imagine.
Yeah, if I could take a shot at that, Pete, great question. So we talked about culture. The culture before hybrid and virtual is not the culture that we have now. It's just completely different. People have worked from home for a while, view their job and their company very differently, and a lot don't want to go back. So to me, all the more reason to have some good people analytics, more important maybe than ever before, as to how are people feeling. about working from home? How are people feeling about going back to the office? How are people feeling about the communication from their boss and from their company? So we have to kind of throw out what we thought we knew, about culture and about some aspects of leadership, and really get some new data, some new leading indicators about what's happening inside our workforce.
I think one of the key things also that's changed is we have to finally accept that the 9-to-5 day isn't how business gets done. And as leaders, we need to be in a position to be results oriented and have that focus on the outcomes for our customers. But the idea that somebody's going to sit at their desk, whether they're at home or in an office between certain business hours, the world just isn't running that way anymore. I see that John has a question for us. Go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, my question's about culture. I think it's super important, like everybody else, and it has to come from the top. My question is, when it's rotten and it's coming from the top, how do you change behavior of those people to change that culture?
I'll take a shot at that. I'll use a term Jim Hardwick used earlier. Batting average of helping a company do that isn't going to be very good, because that's the problem, John, in my experience. And if one of us can really get that top leader to see that today's workforce values culture, and they're not going to be able to attract, so show them some data, right? Would be where I would start about what pain points they're having with attracting and retaining talent, which is a problem right now, and engage in that culture conversation.
If I could jump in here too, something that is amazing. They say that 40 or 50% of the workforce is going to change jobs this year. And I just was at a seminar where a gentleman from ADP, who does all payroll, they're top in the country. They said they did a survey. 95% of employees are thinking about quitting. Doesn't mean they're going to quit, but they're thinking about quitting. So if you've got a toxic environment, and a lot of corporate America is toxic, and if you've got a CEO who's absolutely toxic, you got to take yourself out of that situation, because unless the CEO gets run over by a bus, that's going to continue to be toxic. And I call it corporate abuse, to be very frank with you. And I'm a little cynical because of all the years I spent in corporate, but you have to make that decision. And I think a lot of people, because they've been home now, are reflecting on what's important in life. And what important in life is no longer working for the man and getting the crap kicked out of you every day. I want to feel good about myself. I want to spend time with my family. I want to do something that I feel comfortable with, not go in and get beat up at the office every day. That's one of the reasons why there's such a dramatic change. And for the first time in a long time, the employees actually have the upper hand, because they're leaving right and left, and companies are panicking. And so, John, more than ever, they got to look at culture.
Yeah, John, just to get to the real nub, if the problem is at the top, what has to happen is a come to Jesus moment. There has to be a trigger event where that executive realizes that they are the problem and they've got to change. If they don't realize they have to change, if you haven't sold them on the value of change, then nothing's going to happen. I was just on the phone earlier this morning with a HR professional who said, remember that the market for labor consists of 18 to 65-year-olds. 65-year-olds are the end of the baby boom, so they're aging out. An alarming number of people 55 to 65 are opting out. Those two generations didn't have as many children. And so now there's a lack of younger people coming into the workforce. And GDP has been growing faster than job creation. So, and GDP drives job creation. GDP has been growing faster than the employment base, the worker base. So there are, for the first time in many generations, there are more jobs than qualified workers. Suddenly, your value as an employer, it's no longer a seller's market or a buyer's market. It's no longer an employer's market. And somebody has to shake that leader into believing the math.
Yeah. Or replace
And John,
or replace them.
yeah. And John, your question really cuts to why we're having these conversations and the idea that I'm bringing to an audience to want to break everything. What we have all grown up with in our industries and in our careers has slowly not been working, and we have ignored it, and we have pretended that it may not be the case. Last year, everything did change, and what employees expect of the employment experience is different. What our clients and customers expect of our services and the value that we provide is higher. And we need to raise the bar and rise to the challenge. And that is the heart and soul of what this dialogue was designed to address.
Yeah.
If I could, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, there is a customer or a question in the chat from George Crichton or Crichton.
Crichton.
And it was, he talked about the World War II bomber example. So I saw that, my eye went to it. And so he wants to know, how do you actually measure customer satisfaction? And it's not measuring customer satisfaction that matters. It's measuring customer value. Now, you can measure when we measure in marketing, when a client when somebody out in the Ethernet or in the ethersphere has clicked on our content. But if our content is about just general corporate stuff, corporate fluff versus our features versus a unique customer outcome that our unique feature feeds, which one of those content pieces is actually more value to us? So when I produce content that is about, teaches a customer an outcome that they can achieve only by doing business with us, I want to get in touch with that customer who's clicking that content. When my prospecting people prospect about that outcome, that person is my customer. They just don't know it yet. They're my rightful customer because they want that outcome. So somebody who values the outcome that my differentiation feeds, we can measure the value in terms of their interest with that outcome from the first time they've clicked on our content on the internet to the time they accept an appointment, to the time we've talked about that outcome with them in our first call. And actually you can start having a conversation about how many dollars does that outcome mean for your business? What does that outcome mean for you personally in your career? So you can measure the value of your differentiated outcomes from a very early stage. Yes, it's an approximate measure, but it's the right question. George, I hope you're on still and you heard that. If not, I hope you're enjoying this on the recording.
If we want to turn it a little bit to our audience, one of our goals today was to pique your curiosity and ask you to think differently about your business and what you measure, and does it actually matter? Did we achieve that goal? Feel free to speak up or share in chat. A nod of a head is also awesome.